Really? Ooh, I'm surprised. Ooh. You guys are really hopeful. So this puts an extra burden on NASA.
It does.
All right, we've got one left. Is your favorite alien a fabulous microbial community that uses radioactive decay as energy source? I wonder who made that up. A cute blue fuzzy alien with big eyes you could talk to and take home with you? Or someone in this room?
I think we know the correct answer to that.
I am so happy that cute blue fuzzy alien got some votes. Other than that, it's split. So. Zog the alien. All right, fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for playing along. So I'm not going to redo those for you. I'm going to ask you other questions that I think that I want to know. And I'm running the panel, so I picked the ones I like. So this is one that I've thought about a lot. I'm sure you guys have too. Pete has thought about it a lot. We've discussed it. And that is, do we need to have at least a framework definition of lifelike processes? What is life in some sense? Or can we employ anomaly detection? Like we heard about this morning, to search for weird patterns or objects that stand out and might be life. Let's go down the row. Chris, what do you think?
Ooh, okay. I think I favor anomaly detection because I think that the first approach presupposes that we know a lot more than we really do know.
Yeah.
And so I think my preferred approach for exploration would be to send very capable missions or make very detailed measurements, and then we try to understand what we see in terms of abiotic framework. So maybe focus a lot of effort on understanding what an abiotic system would look like. And then we test the abiotic possibility, and if that doesn't work, then we start scratching our heads more and entertain if life could explain it.
Thank you. Bethany, you're on. Did you hear the question, or should I repeat it?
I sure did.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Go for it, babe.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think I mostly agree with Chris that anomaly detection is a great way to go. I think that realistically, it's probably going to work out that we should have some sort of like a priori models on board that we start with, and then we have these anomaly detection models on board that we can also start with. The challenge is that in many cases, I would surmise that we are not going to know what that system looks like until we get there. And so, I think that this is the power of having an a priori model that can then be updated on the fly. So, like, this is the kind of thing that we're working on right now, is that you want to start with an assumption just to get something, or you could start with nothing, in fact, and just completely build your model as you're collecting data during that mission. And then this way, because I think one of the things that we were challenging ourselves with is like, you're going to start out a mission and maybe everything looks like an anomaly because it's not what you expected. And then probably over time, you're going to start to see the similar kinds of processes and maybe chemistry. So all of these things can become characteristic. And that's when, so I would say, don't be the boy who cried wolf. Like, start learning about your environment while you're out there, and then start employing anomaly detection further later.
So environment first, and then build your theories about life from what you're trying to populate. Interesting. What do you think,
Exactly.
Ray? What's your...
Oh, me. I'm going to finesse the whole question because I think worrying too much about just what life is and what kind of unconventional environments life could emerge in, just getting way ahead of ourselves, because I would be just, we don't even know whether any rocky M-star planets which would be the most common kind of star in the universe, we don't know whether any of those can retain atmospheres. And that's partly because we actually don't understand the physics of loss of high molecular weight species very, very well, but just the observations are indicating, they're not very hopeful so far in terms of that, in terms of having atmospheres. And I myself, I'm putting my eggs in trying to understand roughly habitable environments.
Yeah.
Although that does, when you say a roughly habitable environment, that does beg some question about what kind of life could survive that. But.
I remember, I forget the author's name, but there's a great paper out there that's titled Why I Stopped Worrying About the Definition of Life and Why You Should Too. I forget the author, but it's a very catchy title. You're coming at it, Rob, from a very different position. You're coming at it from the earthly stance. What do you think?
I quite like Chris's approach, thinking about what are the physical processes that could create this thing, whatever it is we're measuring. Are there physical explanations for that? If not, we can defer to biology. The only issue is our own experience of that, looking at fossils on the early Earth, is actually quite tricky. The fossils I showed on the screen were all complex organisms where there's positive evidence that is life. We can recognize those morphologies, see it as some kind of organism. When you get older than that, into the Archean record, where the kinds of fossils that are preserved are very simple, there's lots of arguments back and forth about whether those things are life or not. And the principal arguments people use are this kind of negative approach, which is, is there any physical way to explain this? But I wouldn't say for any of those we're certain either way. Even the best Archean fossils, we still. I think there is a reason. There's a reason to have positive evidence.
And you, exoplanet lady, the kind of data that we're going to get from exoplanets is so different.
Well, the kind of data we're going to get from exoplanets in the short term is very limited.
Yeah.
And, I just gave a whole talk about looking for Earth-like planets because that's a good place to start that we understand. I wouldn't say we understand well, but we understand better than many other kinds of environment. And so in that sense, I'm not somebody who spends my time worrying very much about what the definition of life is. I think as a physicist, it's very interesting to think about where life sits in the sort of panoply of different phenomena from a thermodynamic sense even. I mean, is life a completely ubiquitous property of any system that's complex enough? Is it, its way of fulfilling the signal of thermodynamics and producing entropy? But that is it's a question that's very disjointed, I think, from how should we plan our next space mission.
Mm-hmm. Jane, what do you think?
I think some kind of framework for our search is useful. So if physics had told us microbes can't float in the air, it would have been, a waste of time to look for them. But from what I'm hearing today, I'm really attracted to the idea of using AI to search for anomalies. In a lot of astronomy, we have overwhelming amounts of data, sometimes sitting in archives that nobody will ever look at. And so techniques that could say, here's a thing that's not a normal thing. I love doing that kind of stuff, going like, what the hell is this? I think we would find a lot.
So you're saying we have, a whole lot of data that is moribund that we might exhume and begin to feed into this AI process.
Yeah, so even
Eventually.
Data storage is a problem for some of our branches of science, I think. Something, maybe a spectrum of something in the solar system taken 40 years ago could be what we're looking for. Need to dig it out and take a look.
So one of the things that I've written about and I think is really important but really hard to do is that there is no silver bullet because we have no silver prescription. And so it means that in order to demonstrate that we're really looking at a lifelike process whatever that means, and we haven't defined it, that we need significantly more than just a couple of lines of evidence. And in our space missions so far, because of the limits of our funding, imagination, technology, and way to get things funded, and the fact that we're really still in the baby step era, we don't have a lot of the lines of evidence that we will ultimately need. And that brings up the problem of simultaneity of measurement, or time span over which a lifelike process might evidence itself, because we are trapped in, a very limited spatial and temporal scale ourselves, and that colors what we do and what we think. And we escape that a bit by modeling and microscopy and science fiction. But, how do we plan to add lines of evidence that we can actually correlate to make sense out of it, rather than, we go on this mission and we grab this set of data, and then we go on another mission, and then we grab a data set from Earth. Yeah, you're nodding, Ray. You want to take a first crack at it?
Oh, yeah, well, actually, yes, I think the Enceladus is a good way to concentrate mind on that. So I absolutely agree. It would be great to go back to Enceladus, but if you did have the mission of your dreams, what would you actually look for in Enceladus to say that there actually was life there?
Great question. I think I would focus on very general questions, because it may take more than one mission. Like you're mentioning our lack of a silver bullet. So we're hopeful that we could strike gold in our first attempt, but it may require multiple missions. And if we try to be too specific, we run the risk of not getting data that would have extra value. So rather than look for a DNA molecule, it might be more useful to first try to understand, let's say, what's the origin of organic materials on Enceladus. And so that would then include life, but it would also open the door to these abiotic possibilities we've been discussing too. And there's a whole range of those.
And we certainly need to know those, right, in order to vet the potential biosignature.
Actually, an idea just occurred to me. What if there are amino acids can be abiotic, but if there are amino acids in the plumes and they all have the same chirality, would you think that was a pretty good indicator?
That could probably at least be a bronze bullet.
Yeah.
Bethany, how do you think your AI approach could help us with this? Conflating and correlating multiple different types of data, because we have lots of different, radically different kinds of data.
That's true. Yeah, I think part of the approach is actually, I would challenge all of us to rethink how we set up mission operations, and specifically science data collection. So a lot of the time, these instruments might be separately proposed, so that, let's say, a flagship mission, for instance, you might have really no collaboration from the get-go. And I think that I would challenge all of us to try to work with each other more, even in the formulation phase of a lot of these ideas, than not only just the mission concept, but the instruments themselves and how they could collaborate. The other thing I would also challenge us for is to be creative. Kind of as you said, Penny, we need to challenge ourselves to think creatively about the assets that we have in the outer solar system. Because I think ultimately we were going to fly things, especially if we're talking about current solar system missions, we're going to fly something that is low risk. And I think that we're going to have to adopt a higher level of risk to then adapt a mission to those conditions. So yes, you can send something out there, but I think that mission, basically the software has to be adaptable, so that you could say, well, we've been out here for a little while, let's try something new. Let's try a new experiment that maybe we didn't consider before. And so that doesn't require a huge level of intelligence. It requires that the system itself is adaptable. So, and then on top of that, if we're still praying for Mars, I know some people really are, then I think that's the kind of thing where could we adapt the assets we already have to a new kind of mission. So that would be an extensible mission. And I think that these are really creative challenges, and I think ones that are a great idea. Also, how can we collaborate, between agencies? So could we have effectively a new mission between assets that are NASA focused and ones that are from ESA or JAXA or so on? So I think that could be another tool in the toolbox there.
So it's sort of like an international, multinational campaign, to elucidate sort of one line of, investigation would be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to jump in.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
A thought came to mind. I mean, one thing that might seem not so directed towards the search for life, but this is also an AI-focused conference, is could we send a mission maybe that's not going to look for life right away, but would be used to train AI to some environment that we go to, like the surface of Europa or something, and that training experience would then be valuable for the follow-up mission that looks for the evidence for life.
Yeah, that would be an interesting approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to think about the different approaches you two ladies, talked about. The exoplanet connection to what we're learning about our own planets within the solar system is kind of our great hope for trying to look for biosignatures when we have so much less data. And how much presupposition do you think we can avoid? So for example, Jane, you're talking about, using radio astronomy to look for potential biosignature gases. At some level, that's tied to an earthly perspective, but maybe less so than some things, because we're really looking at a disequilibrium in terms of redox conditions.
Yeah.
And residence time requiring rapid production of something. Yeah.
I think we can probably do it in a fairly agnostic way, because if we did really comprehensive surveys of spectra of bodies with atmospheres or vents, we could just look for stuff you're like, that molecule has no business being there, even if it was, argon hydride, that's not even a molecule.
Right.
I think we could take quite an agnostic approach. If we're doing stuff that's solar system related, we can do analog experiments on a lab bench and so on. We can see how, maybe it's super easy to make some molecule, by bubbling something through rocks or something, which we hadn't just done that experiment before. To do stuff dear to my own heart. Most of the phosphine data doesn't exist because phosphine's really toxic to larger organisms like us, so nobody wants it in their lab. So we haven't persuaded too many people to go out there and risk themselves because I need to know a number today, But yeah, I think we can be pretty agnostic, hopefully. It's hard to get enough telescope time to do some massive spectral survey, but if people got behind it, it'd be really cool.
Well, that's hopeful. That's hopeful. I was going to ask you, Suzanne, if somebody said, Suzanne, dear, we have this giant pot of money, and your primary goal is to look for biosignatures, and you were willing to do that, what would you do?
I think I'd do one of the big space missions that are currently under study, both at ESA and NISA and NASA. So I would do something that is capable of taking spectra of terrestrial planets in the habitable zone of nearby stars, including sun-like stars, because I wouldn't want to put all my eggs in the M-dwarf basket. And I would. So at the moment, the big question is, what is the best way to do that? And whether we should focus on thermal emission in the infrared or reflected light, invisible, and what are the best technologies to achieve that? But it's very clear that we need a large space mission to have the spatial resolving power and the sensitivity that's necessary. And so I think to some extent, actually, the community is doing that. There's a huge effort involving thousands of scientists that are working towards the Habitable World Observatory in the States, but not just. And on the European side, ESA is investigating this mission called LIFE, the Large Interferometer for Exoplanets, which works in the mid-infrared. And so I think, the answer to that question is there's a fair bit of consensus in the community about what we should be doing right now. The other thing is that these missions, both their efficiency and the number of systems they're able to observe, and therefore the how far out from the sun they can go, and the chance, because we still don't know how common life that affects its atmosphere in a detectable way is. So and that affects how many systems we need to survey in order to find it. So having already identified the best targets is a very important thing that we should be doing now. So I'd divert some resources towards that, but that is exactly what I was talking about today. So I think it is being done.
Big missions.
I think big missions, there's no going, I'm not convinced, I haven't come across, I would love to come across a small mission concept that could shortcut for a very specific type of star or a very specific type of planet. There are projects involving sunshades that you can fly in sync with existing telescopes, including JWST. And those are also very interesting. I just don't know enough about them to talk about them personally, cogently.
Let me finish with one question before we turn it over to the audience. For you, Ross, and knowing what you know, your profound grasp of the challenges of identifying ancient life at the microbial level here on Earth, how much of a shot do you think we have on Mars?
I think of finding a fossil probably quite low.
Yeah.
These things are very rare, and to have landed the rover in exactly the right place, to have found it, and to in the few tens of samples we're collecting, to put one of those pencils through a layer of rock that has a fossil, I think it's quite low. However, you go to the geological record throughout Earth's history, and organic molecules are preserved quite commonly. And so we may find a chemical signature. I think there's a much higher probability of finding a chemical signature than there is of finding a fossil. The other thing to note about Mars is the essential lack of tectonics means that early history of the planet is very well preserved, unlike it is on our planet. We go back to these old rocks on our planet, and they're beat up. They've been subjected to high temperatures and pressures.
Replaced.
They've huge diagenesis to the minerals. That's unlikely, to be the case on Mars. And so there's a real opportunity there to look at a planet which has a really well-preserved early history, which our planet does not have.
Even if the life didn't last all that long.
Yeah.
Let me now turn it over to the audience. Let's see.
Everywhere.
Let's go. Okay. All right. These are awkward. Okay, you take that. Pete, go for it.
I'm glad you didn't throw it.
No, I wouldn't do that.
I have a general question, kind of following up some of the discussions in the presentations. One of the things, and I know that Jane, you talked a little bit about it, was the alternative chemistries, and that and of course the answer we had in the question, it seems a lot of people want to say from first principles, and just the general topic of discussion is, why don't we look more for alternative solvents, hydrocarbons, sulfuric acid, others, and alternative chemistries, because as we know, most of our solar system isn't in the habitable zone as we define it. So just a general, how would we do that? What is the chemistry, how do we make sure that there's a life possibility?
Yeah, good question. Who wants to take it? Yeah, go for it, Jane.
Yeah, so to some extent you can calculate, how much reactions would take place in other solvents. There has been some work done on this. So my colleague Janusz Petkowski has a paper out, in fact, about sulfuric acid. And some of this is surprising, like some of the organics you'd think would just, give up and die when they see it are actually quite robust. So the basic energy calculations, I think, can be done for different bodies, both hot and cold,
Cool. Anybody? Yeah, you want to
Yeah,
weigh
so I
in,
was
Greg?
just on a viva very interesting thesis viva at Cambridge on Jordan, where he was looking at sulfur metabolisms that are not quite like what we have on Earth, but which could potentially work on Venus. And the nice thing about this is even though there wasn't a particular organism in mind, by starting from the metabolism, he could turn that into predictions about this SO2 abundance. And so throwing out different chemistries, different metabolisms, and then understanding them well enough to tease out observable implications is the sweet spot, I think. Mm-hmm. And we can do that for things that are not too far from Earth chemistry. If you want to talk about silicon-based life or something like that, I don't know to what extent we can anticipate
What about
those.
applying it to different temperature regimes?
Yeah, well,
Planets with wildly different temperature regimes.
yeah, so I mean, I work on lava planets. We have magma oceans, and
Yeah.
what kind of fish could live in magma oceans?
My
There's
lava
lots of
fish.
energy. Or on the cold side, there's been a lot of speculation
Yes.
about life and hydrocarbon lakes on Titan.
Right.
Even to the point where people started thinking about how do you make a cell membrane that doesn't dissolve in a hydrocarbon lake. And so there are interesting things to think about there. We actually, some colleagues of mine and I pitched an idea to NASA astrobiology, don't just follow the water, but it didn't fly. So.
There is a lot of sentiment to stop with the water thing and move on. You know, water's good. We kind of identified it in a lot of places. We got it nailed. It's time to move on. Oh, yeah, Beth. Speak.
That's okay. I was waiting. I'd like to jump on that metabolism train because I think metabolism is probably a great way to think about it. Obviously, if we see evidence of metabolism, you're going to want a lot of other lines of evidence. But if we think about one of the principles of what is life is it's something that transforms chemicals into energy or something into something else. So, a lot of the work that I actually do, which I didn't talk about, is looking at the byproducts of life. I particularly think about stable isotopes and how life actually fractionates those isotopes. But I think that, if we want to try to think about systems that are not necessarily Earth-like, we can consider the common metabolic pathways and what effects those have, but also what are the kinds of chemical reactions that could happen on a different planet or moon or system, asteroid, whatever, and then what are the kinds of alterations would you see that could result from something making a form, a body, a whatever, a biomass
Structure
out of that material. So I think that that's the way that you could approach it.
Next question.
Is this working? Yeah. So I really enjoyed this discussion about how to identify a biosignature. Of course, the anomaly detection and doing it by trial and error works when you have free data flowing around and you have all the time. But in a realistic scenario where you have to build a mission, you have to convince the taxpayer that you'll have to put $10 billion into it and you want to search for life, that's not a viable strategy, right? So you want to give the public a very clear goal or a testable hypothesis, as is done in various areas of physics and other sciences, a clear narrative on this is what we're after, this is the experiment we want to build, and we'll test it, right? We don't seem to have that in planetary atmospheres, especially exoplanetary atmospheres. So my questions to the panel is, how do you navigate that situation when you want $10 billion, yet you're not prepared to say what exactly do you want to look for? And second, do you actually have an answer for what to look for in the best case scenario?
Interesting. I mean, that sort of gets into grantsmanship versus what you really want to do, right? Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
Well, I think, thinking specifically in the context of these big space missions I alluded to before, we do have a clear sort of, you have the null hypothesis and you have the hypothesis 1, and I think those are, the hypothesis 1 is relatively well defined. We're looking for probably oxygen or ozone in combination with methane and perhaps CO2. And that is something that is not necessarily entirely foolproof, as I'm sure you've been part of many debates discussing this, and it's also not the only way to look. But I think that is the best first hypothesis that we want to test. And the neat thing about it is that in order to test our hypothesis, we need to collect significant numbers of spectra for habitable planets in the sense of planets with temperatures likely to sustain liquid water on their surface. And that is going to give us much better information on the kinds of environments that exist, and is going to allow us to very much refine our set of hypotheses that we then want to test. In parallel with that, of course, we need to be doing a huge amount of work on cataloging the different kinds of chemical pathways and understanding the interplay between these pathways and the conditions in the atmospheres. But I think that that there's the simple story that you tell to US Congress, and then there is the, if you like, the more open-minded survey view of these missions, which is actually provides you with an almost guaranteed science return, if you see what I mean.
I like Suzanne's answer a lot.
Okay,
I
we
think,
vote for your answer.
yeah, because you want to have this excess or general capability, so you can take this practical perspective to address hypotheses that are important for moving the field forward. But then if you have that excess or general capability, then you open up the discovery space. And a great example of this is a story told to me by my old boss. He was the PI of the Cassini mission that detected hydrogen, but we also analyzed Titan. And Titan's atmosphere has lots of organic compounds. And he was telling me that when they were first designing the mass spectrometer, this is the instrument that measures all these molecules, he was telling me that they wanted to cut off the mass range at around like 40 mass units, because all the models that were available at the time suggested like the most complex organics you'd find in Titan's atmosphere would be like C2 or C3 compounds. And then we actually went there, and true, we were able to measure the C2 and C3 compounds, so we satisfied that goal, but then we also discovered molecules that were hundreds or thousands times larger.
So make no small plans, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, please. I don't think we can hear you very well yet.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we got it.
I think Chris touched on this a little bit, but tying it back to strand one from Alexis, talk about using AI to identify geographic landscapes and how they change over time. Is this something that could we do something similar for the surfaces of other planets and moons, like cryovolcanoes on Enceladus, and like with the existing telescopes like JWST and Vera Rubin? Do we have the resolution for that, or will the images have the resolution needed to apply AI, or if not, what would we need?
Maybe I can answer for the exoplanet component of the question. So
yeah.
Even with the wildest and most ambitious proposals to try and not only, so when I talk about direct imaging of an exoplanet, I mean the planet is in 1 pixel and we're just getting the light from that 1 pixel and possibly getting a spectrum from it. And actually, spatially resolving a distant exoplanet is beyond anything that we have current concepts for. We can use time to resolve the structures on an exoplanet. People have done this for the Earth, looking at reflected light from the Earth, trying to see if we could infer the structure of continents and oceans. And we can do it at, if you're thinking in terms of circle harmonics, you can do it at the level of, we know there's 2 big continent masses and 2 big oceans on Earth, provided that we know roughly how long a day is. If we don't know how long a day is, we are actually not even able to do that.
We've known that our planet has been habitable for 4 billion years. Do we know what the Earth would look like as a single pixel 3 billion years ago, 2 billion years ago? Because
oh yeah, actually, Lisa Kaltenegger has a paper laying out model atmospheres corresponding to different time slices. And of course, one of the challenges in looking for biosignatures is that oxygen often comes to mind. For the first 2.5 billion years of Earth history, there was essentially no oxygen in the atmosphere. We know that very precisely about Earth. And maybe oxygenic photosynthesis is a very rare event, given how long it took on Earth. And so finding anoxic biosignatures is a lot trickier.
Trickier, yeah.
Thought about it, but Lisa did have this paper, you know, if the anoxic early Earth, more methane, less CO2, and it's something to look for.
Yeah, I think, is there, oh, Bethany, did you have a comment?
Yeah.
Go for
Yeah, I
it.
was just going to address the Enceladus part of that question. And I think that one of the things that I would ask is what do you need AI for? So the quick answer is yes, we could absolutely like develop, and actually people already have, there's an undergraduate who actually developed a convolutional neural network that looks at the surface of Enceladus and identifies features. I think she just got it published. So it's like, these are things that we can do. It just depends on what you're looking for. So I think that I would certainly not jump to, can I machine learning my project? But I think that there are really great things, like if you wanted to look, as you, the person who asked the question suggested, like cryovolcanism. So if you wanted to specifically look for some change in the surface of that, the challenge is that we don't have a lot of pictures over a long enough time. So I think I'm really excited to see what happens with Europa Clipper, and we get these really great images, and I'd love to see them processed really quickly so that we could potentially see things like this in you know, real time.
Cool.
One more back here.
Yeah, one last question from the audience.
Hi, I was wondering, is the probability of life more rare over space or time? And if the answer is time, does that, or do you think that should restrict how far away we're looking?
Did you guys catch that?
I
didn't
think
quite hear it.
The question was about whether the...
Like, is the probability of life more rare, like in space or in time throughout the universe?
Oh, space or time.
I think we would love to know the answer to that. I'm not sure we do,
Or do
but
you have
it's...
any ideas?
Both,
so
maybe.
It's true that, you know, on Earth, life has existed for most of the lifetime of the Earth, but life that we could detect from afar, I think has, you know, is essentially the way we think about it coincident with the Great Oxygenation Event. So that restricts it to a much narrower range. It's also unclear how long in the future we have ahead of us, partly because our star will one day evolve into a red giant, partly because we are, you know, maturing technologically probably faster than we are socially, and so there are challenges associated with that. So I think it's a very important question to ask what is the lifetime of life on a given planet, and in its different forms. But whether that's rare, whether that's a stronger constraint than where in space to look at. I mean, I guess an interesting point we can take your question to is to ask what kind of stellar populations should we be looking for life around? You know, is it better to go around young stars? Is it better to go around metal-rich stars or metal-poor stars? There's some really interesting points about the fact that the abundance of radioactive elements in the core of a planet controls how long it can sustain plate tectonics for, because it's the radioactivity that drives that. And that might be related to how close you happen to be to a relatively recent supernova when the planet and the stars fall. So there's all sorts of really interesting questions we can ask, but I don't think we have any answers.
Yeah, we're not smart enough to answer that. In fact, I don't know if we ever will be, because we live in a heck of a big galaxy, you know, and we're itty and bitty. Yeah, Ray.
Yeah, so the sort of things Ross was talking about on how long it took for complex life to evolve on Earth, I think is one of the essential astrobiology questions. And it relates to this question of intermittent, of life in being rare in time in some planets. That For the Earth, well, we don't know why it took 2 billion years to get to complex life even after oxygen on Earth. Was that unusual? Is that unusually long, or is that unusually short? But the fact is that on Earth it was really a squeaker, because in only another 500 million years or so, because of the continuing brightening of the sun, we undergo a runaway greenhouse and turn into Venus, and maybe less than 500 million years. And so we just barely made it. If it took another 500 million years to get to complex life, we wouldn't be having this meeting. And then if you have a slightly higher mass star, you have even less time than that. But so that's why I think the complexification time scale is a critical thing that we need to understand better in order to understand just how prevalent complex life might be out there in the universe.
The other thing to think about is that these evolutionary events that led to things that could be a biosignature, the evolution of photosynthesis, or the evolution of eukaryotes, or the evolution of animals or land plants, things that fundamentally changed how the planet worked as a system, and may have changed its chemistry. You know, those are events that seemingly happened once. In each case, you know, if you think about animals, we have a single animal common ancestor, or land plants have a single common ancestor. They may have evolved multiple times at that time, but that lineage outcompeted other things that were around at that time. So I think, you know, there is a inherent randomness to that, in a sense. I mean, we don't fully understand why those things happened when they happened.
Yeah, it may partly depend on the stochastic nature of the planet's geological
Biology.
behavior itself.
Yeah, I'll mention, I'd like to emphasize, go even further back, and the origin of life is the real kicker for me. How probable is that on a so-called Earth-like planet? It seems like from the history of life on Earth that life is very tenacious. It's gone through several mass extinctions, but the origin of life is the mystery, because we just have the sample of one, right? And that's why I think it's important that whether you buy my sales pitch for Enceladus or some other sales pitch, I think we can all agree that it's important to search to get some clues to that question. The way I like to think about it is how Darwin was inspired for the theory of evolution. He wasn't just sitting in his garden in England, right, coming up with this idea. He's out there actually exploring, getting new types of information, and I think that's where some of the value can come from, exploring our solar system and the exoplanets.
Yeah, so that argues for a little bit less constrained exploration than the tightly well-formed formulae with hypotheses where we pretend to know that we already know stuff, but that's kind of at odds with the way we get things funded. Let me ask everybody one more question, which is what we asked on the board. You get to pick and just take a couple of seconds. Are we going to likely find extraterrestrial life sooner, better, faster here in our own solar system, or in the population of exoplanets? Jane?
I'm really optimistic for solar system first. I'd love in about 20 years we've found some convincing biomarkers or things on perhaps Mars and Venus and Titan and Europa and Enceladus. And I think there's young people in the room today who are going to be doing that science. And maybe it'll be like 20 years, we'll have some really cool results. And if we had multiple, not necessarily all certain, because they're not all going to be certain, but if we had multiple solid indications of life, either extant or in the past, I think that would be something that's maybe easier to do in a shorter time scale than, for example, Habitable Worlds Observatory, which I still want to have, please.
So what's your take on it, Susan?
So my take on it is going to be the exoplanets, partly because I have to say this, it's kind of a job description, but also because I think we're going to survey hundreds.
Yeah.
Right? And,
Numbers game.
So even if it is relatively rare, the specific type of biosignature we're looking for, we will find it if it's there in that 100+ sample. And and in terms of the race, I love the fact that we have a race. I mean, who would have thought, even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that we'd be in that position? That there's a very good chance that in the next 25 years, we'll find it one way or another. So, it's like betting on the football. I don't really care who wins so long as somebody wins. That's a good
I just want somebody to win, right? Yeah, what do you think, Ross?
I think if it's life living now, I think your approach, Suzanne, is the best one. If it's life in the past, we might find that first in the solar system.
Yeah. Very different approaches to figure that out, though, right? Different data, different missions. Yeah, Ray?
I think it's slightly more likely that we will find indications of life through biosignatures on exoplanets precisely because of the larger numbers, and also eventually the larger numbers of truly Earth-like conditions. But it's going to be much harder convincing people that it's truly a biosignature.
Because you can't hold it in your
Because
hand,
there's always the question, is there some unanticipated abiotic source of methane or something? If we do detect it in the solar system at any point, whether it's first or afterwards, the follow-up and making it really convincing will be much easier because you can go there and put it under a microscope and actually see it.
Good point. So exoplanets might happen sooner, but maybe not as convincing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris?
I like Ray's answer. I'm going to call it a wash for that reason, just to be annoying, because, we'll have huge statistics from exoplanets, so that's definitely an advantage on that side of things. But then on the other counter-argument for the solar system would be just the depth of information that we'll have will vastly exceed what we have for any given exoplanet. And ultimately, it's going to depend on what nature gives us, and can't make that prediction. I think the best we can try to do is go take a look.
Cool.
I could actually amend just quickly that biosignatures, I think, will always be hard to make really convincing. But technosignatures, this was echoing what was said, technosignatures can be made very convincing.
I'm waiting for Klingons.
But even in terms of technosignature gases, I'm much more confident that, say, sulfur hexafluoride has no geological source of any significance. So.
Bethany, you get the last word.
Well, I will say that I'm hopeful for in our solar system, just like Jane. I think that would be, I'm really hopeful for Enceladus, Europa, and lava tubes on Mars.
Yep, cool. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for your wonderful talks. Thanks for your thoughts. Thanks to the audience for your attention and your questions. And we'll be back doing it again tomorrow morning. So rest your brain cells. Thanks. This gentleman would like